Hello, and welcome to this edition of Salam Shalom Report on Palestine, Israel. I'm Mark Hage. It is day 804 of Israel's genocide in the Gaza Strip, and according to the Gaza Health Ministry, 71,800 Palestinians have been killed, 171,550 have been wounded or injured, many of them severely. 9,500 Gazans are still reported missing. As I speak to you now, Israel is still bombing the Gaza Strip, reducing what little remains there to rubble. Women, children, the elderly, anyone is a target for the Israeli military, and there is no end in sight. Today, our program features an interview by Simone Zimmerman, the producer of the podcast Beyond Israelism, with Yulie Novak. Ms. Novak is the executive director of B'Tselem, Israel's most distinguished human rights organization with an international platform. During the interview, Ms. Novak talks about the personal trajectory of her life, how it is she grew up in the lap of Israeli Zionism, passionately committed to her country, its own version of democracy, and then how in time she came to see that the society she is living in, and these are her words, constitutes an apartheid regime. That's right, Israel is an apartheid society, committed, she says, to a system of Jewish supremacy from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River. Before she headed B'Tselem, Ms. Novak also was the executive director of Breaking the Silence, an organization of Israeli soldiers who are dedicated to exposing Israel's crimes and systems of repression and persecution in the occupied territories. We will show you as much of this interview as time permits. Here now is Simone Zimmerman of Beyond Israelism interviewing Yulie Novak.
It took me a long time to understand that I actually was born into apartheid. In order to understand how Israelis got to where they are today, which is, in my view, and it's painful to say it, but a completely genocidal society, you have to understand how this blindness was instilled into us from the day we were born. What we are calling on is a regime shift, is to change the DNA, the fundamental elements of the political system we live under, because we believe it is one that abuses human rights in its essence.
Happy New Year, and welcome back to the Beyond Israelism podcast. I'm Simone Zimmerman. There's a lot I could say to introduce my conversation today with Yulie Novak. Yulie is the executive director of B'Tselem, Israel's leading human rights organization, and the first to label Israel's genocide as such. At a time when so many Israelis have succumbed to fascism, Yulie's courage and clarity stands out, and I see her as one of the country's most vital voices. Israeli dissidents have been an essential part of my own journey out of Zionism. Though they are a tiny percentage of Israeli society, they provoke incredible backlash from the mainstream because they call for a vision of life in that land beyond separation and domination. Yulie and I discussed how growing up under apartheid shaped the limits of her political imagination. To her, all of this is part of the story of how Israeli society became a genocidal society. Yulie also used to run Breaking the Silence, a group of former Israeli soldiers who collect testimonies about the violence that the Israeli military carries out in the occupied territories. During her tenure there, Breaking the Silence was subject to a nationwide smear campaign that started in far-right organizations and was taken up by mainstream media and even the government. She wrote about that experience in a new memoir called Who Do You Think You Are?, which is coming out in English later this year. We'll link to the pre-order page for the book in the show notes. For some context, Yulie and I spoke just before the horrific attack on the Hanukkah candle lighting at Bondi Beach in Sydney, Australia. As we've seen too many times, Israeli leaders and their allies again weaponized this tragic act of anti-Semitic violence to further demonize the Palestinian freedom movement and push for repressive measures that actually won't help keep Jewish communities around the world safer. Yulie and I spoke about how the fear and racism and militarism in Israeli society have led Israelis to commit unspeakable crimes against Palestinians and have condemned everyone in the region to a more unsafe and unstable future. Speaking of unsafe and unstable, I couldn't introduce this episode without also mentioning another terrifying ripple of the genocide in Gaza. the US attack on Venezuela and the kidnapping of their president. It's an event that may seem unrelated, but is actually deeply connected. I wanted to just quote directly from Palestinian-American legal scholar Noura Erakat, who wrote on X this week, "The gutting of the most basic norms of international law to facilitate a genocide in Gaza has made possible the kidnapping of a sitting head of state and the commandeering of a sovereign state, and describing this as self-defense. The atrocities committed in Gaza cannot be contained," she wrote. And it's really no surprise that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and his allies are cheering this on and calling for Iran to be next on the list of regimes that the US goes after. Also, as many have noted, the lies and the spins that the administration is now using to justify an ICE agent murdering Renee Nicole Good in Minneapolis has chilling echoes of the rhetoric that we regularly hear from the Israeli military when they kill innocent Palestinians in the West Bank. This is all part of the world that the genocide in Gaza has helped normalize. I'm so grateful to voices like Yuli who are unequivocal in insisting that there is a different way. I hope you find this conversation as impactful as I did. Hey, Yuli, welcome to Beyond Israelism.
Hi, Simone.
I'm really grateful to have you here right now because for me, you both as an individual are a person who has taught me a lot and been a person I've looked to and learned a lot from. You also are a representative of a community that I feel that I owe a lot to, which is the Israeli human rights community. And the two organizations that you have run have been very instrumental in my own journey in this work. And so I'm really excited to kind of get to talk to you about your journey, learn a little bit more about your family and your family history. You know, for me, 2014 was kind of the moment that I stopped having any illusions that I could try to make change within Zionist institutions and within the Zionist consensus. And I remember meeting Chagai Elad, the former executive director of B'Tselem, when he came to the US on a tour to talk about B'Tselem's new report about the whitewash protocol. And I remember it was a very meaningful exchange for me to learn about B'Tselem took a new step in 2014 after that operation, which was tell me if I'm getting this correctly, but basically B'Tselem decided not to submit its research to to not file complaints anymore within the Israeli legal system.
Yeah, it was around the same time, yeah.
Maybe it was 2015 that happened. But basically the idea was that...
no, the decision was taken even before that, so it wasn't following the campaign 2014, but
it was before that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But, okay.
No, I mean, yeah, feel free to say.
No, I mean, B'Tselem went through, I guess, we're here talking about political journeys, and individuals go through political journeys. And in that sense, B'Tselem is an organization that way before I joined, because I joined B'Tselem only 2.5 years ago. But way before, I looked from the side and said, okay, this is an organization who know how to change. And you're pointing on a moment that I also feel was critical in the organization development, but also in our involvement as a community. The understanding that the Israeli system is completely involved and compromised is part of what we are struggling against, and trying to fix things from within won't gonna work. We cannot count on the political system to correct itself, because what we are struggling with lies at its DNA. I think B'Tselem as an organization also understood that and kind of decide, no, we're not going to play this game anymore. We're not going to keep filing those complaints to the army, to the working within the Israeli legal system, letting them have this kind of facade of legality and morality, while the outcome is actually complete impunity.
What I'd love us to do is really, I'm hoping we can talk both about, what has it meant for you to kind of undergo that journey, both within your society, and what has it meant to you, for you to really face and reckon with this system as an individual and as a human rights worker, or a human rights defender.
Right.
So I actually do want to start with your upbringing. I just read your book, Who Do You Think You Are? This incredible journey that you underwent after your experience leading Breaking the Silence and all of the attacks that were levied against you guys during that time. And I think the reason your book spoke to me so much is because obviously these are the things that I think about. What are the stories that we're raised within that tell us who we are and how we are in the world and set the limits of our imagination.
Right.
So I would love to ask you to start by telling me, what are the stories that you were raised in?
I grew up in Israel, right? I was born in the early 80s. What I would describe as kind of liberal environment, the way I thought of it, very patriotic, loving my country, also loving the land. I grew up really, I was kind of a kid that really loved nature and loved to be outside, still till today. So I think I felt a real connection to the place I was growing in, and also very Zionist, quite leftist. At least that's how I used to thought of myself, and I think of my family and of the environment I was in. We can and should talk about what this left meant back then and how much of today I think of what to be a progressive, to be left-wing means. But back then, that was the idea. I think I grew up on a story that, first of all, Israel and the Israeli system is something good. It is basically what brought my grandparents or allow them to continue living after surviving the Holocaust. That's from one side of the family. The other side of the family, I have a grandmother came to Israel in the 50s from Morocco with her mother and sister, also from kind of Zionist motivations. But for them, Zionism was to get to the Holy Land and to kind of get to the land of the Jews. First, there was this ethos that I grew up upon, which was basically, again, very positive. I'm smiling because I'm trying to get back there. And today I know a lot of things that I didn't know back then, right? About the things that you cannot see or you don't see or you're unable to see when you grow up within this kind of paradigm. Yeah, so a lot of love to my country and also the ability to be very critical. So I was growing up in the 80s knowing that there is an occupation. The occupation is somewhere behind the Green Line. It is done by part of our society, which are basically the bad guys, settlers, however you want to call them, the right wing. And the notion was that we are in this, we're basically living under a just system that need to be corrected. And all we need to do is some kind of minor corrections, which is a legitimate internal discourse, but basically we live in a democracy. I think I was holding this sentiment, and with this sentiment also joining the army when I was 18, to be sincere, without thinking about it too much. I mean, it was just something that you do. I joined the army in the year 2000, so it was the beginning of the second Intifada, and I even stayed some extra time, so I stayed. I was an officer. I served 5 years in the army, so all the years of the second Intifada.
You wrote a lot in your book about your grandfather, who I believe
Saba Moshe.
And your Saba fought in 48, right?
He came in the 30s, actually, with his parents from Poland, and he joined the Etzel. So he fought in the militias against the British occupation.
And what were the stories that you learned from him?
First of all, I admired him always. He was a really very quiet man, very wise, very, very wise. I think something about how to struggle for something you believe in and take risks. So when we were young, he used to take us, me and my brothers, kind of to see the museum of the Etzel and the Lehi and kind of the Jewish militias that fought the British. And I remember I really admired him because he was the kind of, those stories, again, were part of this bigger story of what enables life in Israel. I held myself not to say in Israel-Palestine because back then it wasn't Israel-Palestine. It was just Israel.
As a child, you mean? It was just Israel.
Yeah. Just now I'm talking to you and I want to say that's what enabled us life in Israel-Palestine. But no, that wasn't Israel-Palestine. It was only Israel. So again, it's not a naive understanding of things. It was just sometimes very kind of, I really was interested in that and learned a lot about it. And yet the boundaries of the stories today, to say that were very confined. Like I could see something only within these boundaries.
B'Tselem's reports now talk about the Nakba, talk about colonialism, all these things. Were those words that were at all in your consciousness?
No. Nakba, I don't think it's a word I heard before. I don't know. As a teenager, I really cannot remember hearing the word Nakba. I might heard it sometimes, but maybe in the university, and I think in my 20s, and I think it was mostly because there was this right-wing organization, Im Tirtzu, that came out with this pamphlet of Nakba Charta, kind of attacking the concept of the Nakba. I think that was the first time that I really kind of delved into even the concept of Nakba. No, I was growing up in first of all, totally Jewish society, right? Completely Jewish, which is very common in Israel, right? We live in apartheid. It's not, we live in separate communities. So I never knew any Palestinians. I mean, you're calling the Nakba, and it is true, I would call it the same, but learning about it as a child, it wasn't the Nakba, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was the War of Independence, Milchemet HaAtzmaut. That was the War of 1948 was for me growing up. And probably the most, again, back then, if I'm looking back, the most just war that someone can think of. And you know very well the narrative, right? The UN decided to divide the country and to split it in a fair way between Jews and Arabs. The Jews accepted that offer. The Arabs didn't. They started a war, and the rest is history. That was the story. I mean, I almost want to apologize for it, but I also don't want to apologize for it because what we're doing here, I guess, is kind of to track back how the system operates, right? And it is a sophisticated system that works on the mentality of the people under it. So yeah, that's what it was. It wasn't the Nakba. It was the War of Independence.
This is the story that I was raised on. So tell me about your decision to get involved with Breaking the Silence.
Throughout my 20s, something did happen to me, and that was that I was a student, and for the first time in my life, I joined demonstrations in the West Bank. So it was, again, the early 2000s, the separation wall was built back then. And there were demonstrations every Friday against the wall. Palestinians who the separation wall was just put in place and was taking parts of Palestinian land, right? So there was demonstration. I'm saying was because today we don't see it anymore, this kind of popularizing, because the crackdown and the oppression is too much. And I have to say that I was curious. So I joined one of these demonstrations. I remember the first time I went to Bil'in, is a village in the area of, let's say, Ramallah, Modi'in, I don't know how, in the center of the West Bank. And then I found myself very quickly, like the demonstration started, it was a very peaceful demonstration. And then in a minute, the Israeli army showed up. They stood there and started firing at us, rubber bullets and gas grenade. And I remember I was shocked because, first of all, the first time I'm standing in front of Israeli soldiers that are kind of pointing their gun at me. I'm like, what? It's already a bit confusing. But more than that, I said, how come? I mean, there were children there, the whole community was there. Women, how come they are firing? And for me, that moment was the first crack. Like, how come if I live in democracy, how come this scene is even possible? And then I'm going back home in Tel Aviv, and it's like life is usual, like nothing happened. I said, okay, that's how it goes, like every week. And then I start visiting the West Bank more and more, and seeing things that I never saw before, and felt, first of all, very angry. I felt that I had been lied to, that there is a story. And again, I'm in my mid-20s, right? After I was in the army, it's after the second intifada. Like, I'm against the occupation, but I don't know basic things about how this system of oppression works. And towards the end of my 20s, for me, it was, I think, quite clear that, okay, that's something we should fight for. So I joined Breaking the Silence. I have to say that back then I was still quite naive about what we're doing. And for me, it was still kind of, let's correct the system. My idea...
So you saw giving these testimonies, like tell me about, like you guys gave testimonies or collected testimonies, right?
Yeah, for me, those testimonies of soldiers the idea was very simple. We will bring soldiers, they will expose the wrong of the occupation, right? What they did, what they saw, whatever violations of human rights under the occupation. People will see it, understand it wrong, change their mind, we'll fix this policy, we'll make peace, everything will be fine. And then came 2014. And 2014, for me as well, was a crucial point. I saw something that I never saw before, even though there were military operations before 2014. I realized for the first time that what I'm seeing is actually a calculated and systematic strategy. Its results are not kind of a diversion from it. They are part of it, and the results were horrific. Those results, what Israel called collateral damage, were more than 2,000 people that got killed during 50 days of fighting, and among them more than 500 children. So that was the first, like understanding something systematic wrong. But I think more than that, and maybe it relates to what you said before, it was the first time I felt this huge gap between me and my society. Because for me, it was unbearable. The cost, like the price tag of this fighting was unbearable. 500 children in 50 days. And first, life goes on. And second, people around me see that as kind of a reasonable, necessary price tag for keeping us safe. And I'm saying, in what kind of distorted worldview, base of values we hold, if that is reasonable? That didn't make sense. Everyone around me, not the people in Breaking the Silence, but my family, my friends, society I live in, for them, it just made sense.
You just said a bunch of things that like really struck me and resonated for me that I want us to get into a little bit more together. I think this idea of like the knowing and not knowing, like they're knowing that something is happening, but not allowing yourself to actually really see it and face it fully, seems to me, like I can say as a person abroad, watching Israeli society right now, that question all the time, like, do people actually know what's going on? That's something people are asking me constantly. I'm glad you mentioned the fact that there were these military campaigns that had already happened. Right. And there was already a siege that was going on for many years before 2014. And for me as well, it was really just the moment that I was paying the closest attention is the reason that it was such a breaking moment for me. I think also just this idea of like, I think it's important for us to kind of talk about 2014 and talk about all these moments, because these to me are the building blocks for how we got to the moment that we're in today, where the idea of collateral damage, the idea of self-defense, the idea of this is what we have to do, these are all the justifications that were in the water in Israeli society that has allowed them to turn a blind eye to a genocide, right?
Or to take part in a genocide.
And to take part in a genocide.
Without, yeah. I completely agree. And I agree also that 2014 was a moment where again, most people couldn't see it, but anyone who was able to see, that was a very extreme moment. Not only Israelis accept it, but also the world accept it.
I'm interested in kind of breaking down with you, what are these kind of psychological justifications in Israeli society that say this is okay, this is not okay. There's a good Israel here, there's a bad Israel here. And what you wrote about in the book was this idea that like giving public testimony about the West Bank was okay, but when you guys published a report about 2014, that was a new crossing of the red line. And that is what led these fascist groups and the government to kind of go after you and designate you guys as enemies of the state.
There was something different about 2014. Gaza is different. Also for Israelis, Gaza is kind of always been, first of all, the ultimate other. You know, if we're talking about dehumanization of Palestinians, there is the general dehumanization of Palestinians, and then there is the specific dehumanization of Palestinians in Gaza. And that's what I wrote about, and we were very well aware of in Breaking the Silence. The West Bank can be explained in the mindset of Israelis as this something that our problem are the settlers. We need to get the settlers out of the West Bank. Never mind that it's unrealistic. But if we get the settlers out of the West Bank, everything will be fine. We can make peace. Again, in the eyes of this specific kind of part of Israeli society, let's call them liberal Zionist, or they call themselves left Zionist left, but whatever, which I was part of, right? That cannot work in Gaza. Because Gaza is not about, at least since 2005, is not about the settlements. And in this Israeli mindset, we left Gaza in 2005. We withdrew the settlements. We took out all our civilians out of Gaza. And something very bad is still happening there. They are still hating us. Why is that? And then a war starts. Again, 2014, again, the mindset of Israel is it is a military campaign. It is a war that we have to do because, you know what, we need to go back into this military and security mindset of Israelis. Most of us grew up knowing that we are in zero-sum game, that in order to keep us safe, we have to keep the Palestinians down, right? And we can use different means to do that. They're firing rockets. We need to go in and fight every few years. The military expression for that was mowing the grass, right? For Israelis to come and say there is a problem with the way we fought in Gaza or the fighting itself in Gaza, that is something that was completely kind of, what are you doing? I mean, even for the leftist, it was something that, no, don't touch it. We worked tirelessly on collecting testimonies from soldiers who took part in that campaign, and it took us a few months to publish a report about it. And before we published a report, I remember my father came to me and said, "You are doing such a good work in the West Bank. Why do you need to touch Gaza? Leave it. But the apartheid mindset is really to kind of hold within you the partition of the space. So the West Bank is one thing, Gaza is another story. The fact that there are Palestinians there and there, okay. Yeah, and I think we touched a very kind of exposed nerve there within Israeli society, which the response was very harsh.
So tell me about the response.
Looking back, I think today I understand it as actually the first major crackdown on civil society and human rights organization in Israel. So it was mid-2015. First of all, it was very scary because it started very fast and very, I would say, holistic. In one moment, all the kind of elements of the state it felt like that, are turning against us back then Breaking the Silence, but human rights organizations in general.
You were, by the way, an organization of 15 people, right?
Back then, yeah.
You're a tiny group of
15 people. I was the oldest. I was, I think, 32 22 or something like that, and I was the oldest person in the organization, right? So not only 15 kids, come on, like most of us were in our 20s. Campaign started. It started from the political kind of level. The prime minister himself took part in it, ministers attacking us, slurring us, accusing us for countless things that were, the vast majority of them weren't true. Basically put on us kind of the marking us as the ultimate traitors. That came from the political spectrum, and the Israeli media caught it immediately. So there were a few legal cases that were brought against us. The incitement was really... it was just insane. And, you get it all at once. So you see your face on TV, on social media. We're talking about 2015. It was all over Facebook. Really harsh incitement that also got to our private lives.
You guys had a right-wing organization planted moles inside of your organization,
right,
and had people recording you in your meetings, pretending to be one of your own, someone that you loved and cared for very dearly, who was recording you. And they did this in a bunch of other human rights organizations also, and then published, basically tried to entrap you guys and entrap you as people doing espionage, right?
Yeah, definitely. So and that actually, all this attack became very personal. It was scary to walk on the street. By the way, the most damaging thing that they succeeded in doing in real life was regarding B'Tselem and not breaking the silence. And that resulted in the arrest of few of our colleagues for almost 2 weeks under kind of security charges, right? So in a trial that kept going until it ended with nothing. One of the most troubling outcome personally to me was the fact that they really succeeded in instill within us this deep feeling of paranoia. The fact that you cannot really know who to trust. And these were horrible, horrible days because, the occupation keeps going. The violence against Palestinians keeps going. And we have to deal, first of all, with ourselves. That's already felt terrible, but also with this kind of, you don't know who you can trust anymore. I mean, people I worked with are now turning against me. And I remember those moments in breaking the silence when we're sitting there and people are looking at each other. And I saw the mistrust. Now it's people that struggle together, right? You're supposed to have trust on each other. I have to say that it was really harsh. I think that looking back, I'm also, funny to say, but almost grateful for that experience, because if until then I still had this kind of illusion that I'm living within I'm smiling because it's hard for me to say it today, but within a democratic place. And it's funny to say it because today it's how come? I mean, I lived under apartheid all my life. But anyway, that was the moment where I think it was clear to me that now, if a system can turn so quickly, all these systems are supposed to protect us, right? The legal system, the police, the media can turn on us so quickly. I think that was a moment of profound understanding that I'm not in Kansas anymore. And that kind of pushed me to start a journey to understand what it is. If it's not a democracy, so what it is.
I think listening to you, something that also really strikes me is that I know what you guys were saying at the time to defend yourselves. Like, you guys were really doubling down on your patriotism, your commitment to this country, to this system, to making it better. And it really struck me reading your book, the way you wrote about, like, the more I tried to, like, reaffirm my commitment to the system, the more I tried to make that distinction between Israel and the occupation, the more Israel said to me, no, Israel is the occupation. Yeah. And you are a dissident, you are a traitor, you're outside the system.
Right, right. So I think these were the first days where I started to think about the Israeli system as a regime, not as a state, not only as a mechanism, and not as a government, and not as a state with occupation, but as a regime of occupation. And also, yeah, I don't want to say ashamed, but I see the how incoherent it was to try to fight this with this patriotic bullshit of no, we're the good guys. We served in the army. How come you're attacking us? I mean, again, back then it was very frightening. This fear was just a fear of kind of revealing something profound about my society, about who we are, that I really didn't want to see. It was to realize that it is not the legitimate Israel and then the occupation that is illegitimate, but that I'm truly part of something that is deeply wrong. And that is, again, very personal because, you start by asking me about the story I grew up upon. That was me. I mean, Zionism in that sense was me. To be patriotic and to love Israel was part of who I am. It completely didn't make sense anymore.
I do have to read just one line from the book that I thought was really beautiful, and it's exactly what you're talking about right now, which is that in all of my years of resistance, I couldn't fathom that just beyond the turn, a step beyond the wall, lay the potential for my liberation. No one leaps into this liberating abyss with a smile on their face. It's always with terror in their eyes. And then I'm going to skip ahead. You wrote again, this story could no longer keep me safe. I was shoved over the edge, beyond the dream, beyond who I was. And here I am, the one who excelled at this game, followed the rules that they set, did whatever it took to prove my loyalty and love for this country. I became a dissident. Your book is about basically running away from Israel after this experience and having to kind of go out and process the trauma of becoming public enemy number one in your own country. Mm-hmm. And what I can feel sitting here with you right now is actually a rootedness in the honesty of facing this thing fully and not having to make excuses or justifications and holding on to contradictions. Like I can feel, I don't know if it feels that way for you, but that's...
Yes, it does. And I'm this book was written quite a long time ago, and I mean back then in the days, and I'm thinking about it now. I'm quite happy I wrote it because I'm not there anymore. I mean today I'm holding this dissident identity. Is first of all, it's natural to me now. It's obvious that what I'm doing, and I wake up every morning resisting the Israeli regime. That's my identity today. There was a moment where this new identity of a dissident was a very frightening one. And I think that's a moment where really you need to let go of something that you thought you were. Again, only a story, and a very, very manipulative story, I have to say. Yeah, I'm quite happy I catch that moment because today I don't feel anymore these fears and anxiety about walking away from that.
But it's important to remember that most people don't walk away. And I remember for myself, like I did not walk away from my own Zionism willingly. And I think most people think people who are still struggling and see those of us who are quite confident and rooted in the positions that we're taking think that it was like an easy thing to walk over here.
More than that, I think many of us that are already there lose the ability we lose patience for people who haven't done this journey. And it is a journey, and you go through phases, and then there is the phase of the anger, and then the the guilt, and then, I mean, you're going through things, right? The last thing you want is to go back there. And everyone who are still stuck there, sometimes we tend to be kind of dismissive and to not remember how it is. Now, again, it is complicated because I also don't want to go there. I don't want to free anyone from the responsibility to walk this path. But I think it's also important to acknowledge how strong and sophisticated political systems like this are, and paradigms like this are. You know, I think I write about it in the book, and I use these examples from time to time that I was also born to be an heterosexual woman. Nobody told me that. That's a paradigm. It's something that you just born into. I usually say it's like glasses that you put on your eyes, and you don't even aware that they are there, but they are kind of limiting what you can see. And you are not aware that there are things beyond that. So I was born to be an heterosexual woman, and I had to curve my way out of this identity, and it took me 25 years to do so, and to really, and it was scary. That was scary. And for many, many queer people that I know, maybe today less than decades ago, but in my age, it was scary to get out of this paradigm. So again, it is different, but the personal experience, I think, is a bit alike, because Zionism is also a paradigm. And also kind of this story is who you are. And then, you know, you ask yourself, what am I? If I'm not that, what is waiting for me outside? Who is waiting for me outside? What am I going to lose? The optimistic part is the end of what you read. Once you're over, you can breathe.
I really appreciate you like saying all this, and I'm totally here with you. The stories, the stories that justify are much louder and much more aggressive, while the reality that we can see is also much more blatant and in our faces. It's sometimes hard to explain to people who didn't grow up in those systems, like what those blocks are to people actually like seeing the reality fully.
In our case, you know, it took me a long time to understand that I actually was born into apartheid. It's a very specific and very sophisticated kind of political machinery that really kind of capture and design your mentality in a way. And for me, in order to understand that, I had to go very far away. I found a way out of it, what I would call, maybe today I would say, my journey to unlearn Zionism started not in Palestine, not in Israel, Palestine, but in South Africa. I got there after I finished. I finished my position in Breaking the Silence. I told you I was completely burned out. I felt like I had to go away, and also to try and make sense of these contradictions that I lived in. And when I got to South Africa, I found myself very much kind of attracted, kind of pulled by the Afrikaners there, the white South Africans who were the one who held the apartheid regime for 50 years. I immediately felt something very, very familiar when I met them. And only there I was able to understand something very deep about apartheid and the way it works on the mind, not only of its subjects that are the victims, that are considered the non-human, the lesser human, whatever, but also of apartheid as a system that works on the mind of the people that are marked as the superior group. You know, I met people in South Africa who told me that during the 70s and the 80s, when apartheid was at its peak, they were sure they were the only democracy in Africa. Now, you're smiling, and I remember I was also smiling because that's, I know that. אנחנו הדמוקרטיה היחידה במזרח התיכון, right? We are the only democracy in the Middle East. And I start to ask myself, how come? I mean, when you look, sometimes you need to look far in order to understand something about yourself. And I understood that this system works very much with this blindness. It creates the space in a way and kind of shape demographically, shape the space in a way that really enables you to believe that you live in democracy. Now, it's very easy to have a democracy when you kind of split the area in a way that is comfortable, decide who will be a citizen, who will not, install immigration rules that enable people to immigrate in, and we can go on. And in that sense, that's exactly the mindset that I grew up in. But there was something else about South Africa and the apartheid there. And that has to do with militarism, chauvinism, and this basic notion and idea that the only way to keep ourselves safe is to keep fighting. And, just like in South Africa, there was a mandatory military service that every white dude had to go when they were 18, and they had tons of wars with all the countries around. I said, no, this is too familiar. And again, not because of kind of historic details. There are tons of differences between Israel and South Africa, and the Israeli apartheid and the South African apartheid. But there is something about how this system works with fear and blindness, and can convince you that that's right. That is the right and the just and the moral thing to do, is to fight for your country, is to oppress other people. That is the only way you can keep yourself safe. I think in order to understand how Israelis got to where they are today, which is, in my view, and it's painful to say it, but a completely genocidal society, you have to understand this background. You have to understand how this blindness was instilled into us from the day we were born.
Look, I want to talk about the genocide report, and I want to talk about the work, but I think for me there was something about what you did that felt very life-affirming for me, was the kind of act of putting your full self into the story and kind of wrestling with, like, you as a political actor and you as a person inside of a system, and then also really allowing the fullness of your family story, your personal journey, to really kind of like spill out on the page and be messy and wrestle with that.
Just to say one thing, I don't think I allowed myself to do anything. I don't think I had any other choice. I mean, it has to do with what, and maybe it's also has to do with something that what we expect from people now. I think what I see, at least around me in Israel, is many people are being pushed by this moment to kind of over this barrier, because reality is so unbearable. If you keep these previous assumptions, as long as you live within this story that we're good, they are the bad guys, that it just crash with reality. So for me, it happened in 2015. For you, it happened in different times. But once you're being pushed there, I mean, what else would you do except continue walking, right? It's like you have to go through it. It's and I see people now facing the genocide, seeing something that, in a way, they are being pushed much harder and in much more violent way
than we were.
There is a genocide taking place, and Israel is conducting the genocide, and Israelis are doing that. Yeah. Not the settlers, not something far away. People need very fast to go through a very harsh political journey.
Yeah.
Acknowledging the wrongs of Zionism is one thing. Acknowledging the fact that Israel is a genocidal society and that the Israeli system is a genocidal one, it's harsher, right? No, I want everyone to go there, but I just know how devastating it is.
So let's start with the name of the report. Our genocide.
Yeah. Strange name, huh?
Yeah.
B'Tselem is quite unique in the sense that we're an Israeli organization, but we're Israelis and Palestinians who are working together and struggling together to bring upon a fundamental political change. What we are calling on is a regime shift, is to change the DNA, the fundamental elements of the political system we live under, because we believe it is one that abuse human rights in its essence. Genocide is an intentional act that is aimed to destroy a group, that is done by governing force, right? It can use different tactics, different mode of actions, but the ultimate goal is not necessarily to kill each and every person within this group, but to destroy the group as such, to make the group disappear. In order to do so, you have to dehumanize the people in this group. Because genocide is never something that is being done by a small group of people or just... It is always something that is done with the cooperation, usually support of the entire society. Maybe part of it is also turning a blind eye, but with the support of entire people. In order to do that, you have to dehumanize the group that you attack.
B'Tselem is not the first group to use this word.
No.
B'Tselem actually, in terms of the human rights community, was actually quite late in comparison to, first of all, Palestinian organizations and many genocide scholars around the world who were kind of coming out and using that word. I'm curious what you saw as the specific role of B'Tselem in terms of contributing to this conversation.
First of all, you're absolutely right. We only came out with this report this July, right? And of course, Palestinians were saying it from the first day of the attack. And human rights organizations, UN institutions already identified it as genocide and also wrote some really profound investigations and report analyzing the situation, both on the legal terms and otherwise. Part of what took us time is not to realize that we're facing genocide. I think that all of us understood quite early in the process. What took us time is exactly that, is to understand what is our role as an Israeli organization in the face of genocide. I would never thought I would find like this position to ask myself, what do I do in the face of genocide? We had the ability to just come out and say it's a genocide. We thought that it would be unwise for two reasons. First, it would be very risky, not only for the organizations, but also, again, we are an organization of Israelis and Palestinians who are working together. We have in our team Palestinians from the West Bank, from Gaza, from Jerusalem, and from within Israel. And we knew it's going to put them and us in risks. So we had to do the kind of legal security groundwork in order to ensure our ability to go out, but also the conceptual work and to really understand what we're coming with and to know that we're coming out with something that will benefit struggle. None of us thought that the moment B'Tselem will stand up and say it's a genocide, the genocide will stop. And here I come into the name. I think what we understood we could do throughout conversation and really trying to work together in that sense, Jews and Palestinians from all around, is to tell the story of this specific genocide, which is our genocide. Our, because we are the people of that land. And a genocide is something being committed on the Palestinians of Gaza, and it is oriented and directed to erase the Palestinians of Gaza. But a genocide as a phenomenon of political violence also has this characteristic that it works to erase humanity. Humanity itself, the notion of human beings, because it has to do with dehumanization, with making people believe that a group doesn't have a right to exist, doesn't worth to exist. And in that sense, what we felt we can do is tell the story and try to make sense of how this genocide looks like, and to come from both the perspective of the victims. We know what takes place on the ground. We have the information, but also to use the fact that we are coming from the group of the perpetrators. So we speak Hebrew, but we also speak Israeli. We understand something fundamental about the Israeli system that we believe is important to understand in order to fight it, not in order to justify it. In order to struggle a political system, you have to understand it. And that's what we try to do, to explain our genocide, both its tactics and its model, what kind of elements we find in it. So the different tactics that Israel uses in order to destroy Palestinian society in Gaza. So we're talking about mass killing, about the mass forced removal of people, the mass destruction, the taking apart society, and above it, this kind of thick layer of dehumanization and ongoing incitement to genocide. But we also wanted to contextualize the genocide and to try and explain how we got to that moment. Because, if you ask most Israelis what happened, they will tell you the story started on October 7th. They came, they attacked us, and then everything that came after is a story of self-defense and is completely legitimized because of the atrocities of October 7th. Now, in that sense, Israelis are not unique. Every people throughout history that committed genocide were justifying what they are doing while it took place by means of self-defense in the face of some kind of existential threat. It is always, that's what we have to do. We have no other choice. They brought it upon themselves. You can go on. We thought that as an Israeli organization, we can tell another, we can kind of challenge this story. The first thing we want to do is to explain that genocide is not an event. Genocide is a process. And though the killing started on October 2023, the destruction, it couldn't have happened without prior conditions that were set there decades ago. And you cannot understand our genocide, the Israeli genocide over the Palestinians, without understanding what happened close to 80 years now of a regime of everything we talked about, of apartheid, of separation, of ongoing dehumanization of Palestinians in general, and specifically the Palestinians of Gaza. We talked about 2014. You have to understand, there is a connection of how Israel could have killed more than 2,000 people in 2014, more than 500 kids in 2014, and just keep going, and the fact that it is able to do what it is doing now. So all this thing is kind of, again, every genocide throughout history had its enabling conditions. Of course, apartheid and being part of this settler colonial apartheidistic setting is what brought us there and what enabled it.
One of the ways that we're seeing a kind of, one could even call it genocide denial, or whitewashing that's happening here in the kind of Zionist discourse that I'm paying attention to, is there's an attempt to say what happened after October 7th was a just war, and the just war went awry. Something bad happened along the way, right? Or there are settlers in the West Bank who are these hooligans who we need to rein in those kind of lawless bad actors, or even within the Israeli military that, at this point around the world, the entire world has been radicalized by what we have seen Israeli soldiers themselves posting and broadcasting to the world about what they've done in Gaza, right? It is the documentation of the genocide that Israeli soldiers themselves have provided for the world that is, like, along with the live stream that we've seen from Gaza, that is one of the things that has catalyzed a very profound anger against Israel.
As always, thank you for watching. This is Salam Shalom, Report on Palestine, Israel. I'm Mark Hage. Until next time, take care.